So welcome, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon. We're glad that you are here, and we'll start with just a few words of introduction before we begin. This is our first session in a three-part workshop series for wardens, treasurers, and vestries, and we'll be recording all our sessions so we can add them to our new resource library video section of the EDOLA website. And you can find that if you go to edola.org, resources, and then workshop video gallery. You'll see those available for you. And you can view them anytime, and we'll constantly be adding new sessions as we go along. So we hope that they will be a useful tool for you that you can use in a variety of ways. And I know there are several people who have said they are going to use the videos for like a half-day vestry retreat and ongoing training. So I hope they're helpful for you. Over our next three sessions, we will be exploring a variety of tools and techniques to maximize the impact of your vestry. And we're going to look at roles and responsibilities, ways to enrich your dialogue through more effective agendas and discussions, methods to ensure your long-term financial stability, ways to avoid future financial trouble spots, to stop fraud before it starts, and lots more. And today we're going to begin our series with best practices for elected church leaders, and we're delighted to welcome Alan Brackett to lead our session. Many of you, of course, know Alan and have had the opportunity to work with him over the years, and he's worn many hats in our diocese. Currently, he serves as treasurer of the diocese and sits on the executive committee. He also serves as chancellor and principal verger for Christ Church Cathedral, and he's served 2 terms as their senior warden. He's also served 2 terms as president of our disciplinary board and as a past chair of the board of trustees of St. Martin's Episcopal School. And of course, in his professional life, Alan is one of the founders and the managing member of the MBLB law firm, and has been awarded numerous accolades in this capacity, including Best Lawyers in America and Super Lawyers. So we're grateful to have Alan be part of this series and to share his experience and perspective with us. I'm going to start us off in prayer, and then I'll turn us over to Alan. So the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Almighty and ever-living God, source of all wisdom and understanding, be present with those who take counsel in our diocese for the renewal and mission of your church. Teach us in all things to seek first your honor and glory. Guide us to perceive what is right, and grant us both the courage to pursue it and the grace to accomplish it. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
So, Alan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, so I would typically say thank you for having me. It's Allison's delightful demeanor and smile that coerced me into being the guinea pig for this program. But I'm happy to share with you at least my experiences serving on vestries and with the diocese, and hope that today's conversation can help you do your jobs better. Let me make sure that so is that advancing? Are the pictures moving, Allison? Okay. Not the most technically savvy person. So today we're talking about the best practices for elected church leaders. That is, of course, a picture of the vestry. And vestries, of course, were originally the room where people vested, but became known as the meeting place for parish leaders. And now we describe a vestry as essentially the executive board for each of our individual parishes. The conversation about being an elected church leader really has to start with the law, right? The law, the canons of our church, and particularly the canons of our diocese. And if you have never read the canons, at least I encourage you to read Canon 19, which covers vestries and elected church leaders. So the canons require that there shall be a vestry for each one of our parishes. Cannot be fewer than 5 or more than 25, there shall be 2 wardens, and they have to be at least 18 years of age and communicants at that parish, meaning that they support the operations of that parish as contributing parishioners. Of course, one of the most important jobs is to call the rector for that parish with the consent of our bishop. So Canon 19 tells us what our responsibilities are and how the vestry should be conducted. There has to be an annual meeting of every parish at which the members of the vestry are elected. It's not necessary for the wardens to be elected by the annual meeting, but the members of the vestry must be. If the bylaws of your church require it, of course you must, but otherwise the members of the vestry can elect their own. And Section 2 talks about the notice that has to be given to parishioners in order to Section 3 talks about the meetings of the vestry and how they are called. You can read that for yourselves. It's not terribly difficult. And then Section 4 talks about the responsibilities of the rector versus the vestry, that the rector is subject only to the bishop, is the one who regulates worship. And that is very important. We've all known members of our parishes who believe that worship should look a little different or shouldn't include something that they don't like incense, or a hymn that they don't like. And we don't make those choices. That's the choice of the rector of our parish. The other thing is that certainly the rector is called by the vestry, but anyone else who works for the parish works for the rector, not for the vestry and not for individuals in the parish. So the rector has the authority subject to, of course, to our bishop. And then the last section of Canon 19, which is very important, is that every rector shall have a letter of agreement with the parish, outlining what the responsibilities are, what their compensation is, any limitations for that particular parish on what their duties are, when they're going to be eligible for sabbatical. All those things should be described very clearly in a letter of agreement, which will be submitted to and approved by the bishop. And if I can tell one story out of school, since I'm in my last year as treasurer of the diocese, and we just had a bishop who retired, and come to find out that a letter of agreement was never done for our bishop, which made his departure interesting. Because we had to talk about what that looked like, because no one had ever talked about it before. And I can assure you that our current bishop has a letter of agreement, which is very clear about what her compensation will be and so forth. It's very important. It may not seem important on the front end, but I can tell you from experience, it's extremely important on the back end to make sure that the agreement with a priest is very, very clear, and what they're entitled to and what they aren't. Next, there is a vestry handbook. When I became a vestry member, I got a prior edition of this, and I actually read it, and it surprised my rector, who, because no one had ever read it before to his knowledge. It's important for you to understand it really is a very good resource, and it costs less than $15 on Amazon, and I encourage anybody who serves on a vestry, your church should buy copies of this and have them available, because it's a very good guide and a good resource and reminder for people as to the work that we do. So what are we as vestry members charged with? First, it's truly understanding the canons and what our responsibilities are, what our limitations are. Also understanding the governance documents of your individual parish. Each one of our parishes should have articles of incorporation filed with the Secretary of State and should have bylaws, and they should be regularly reviewed. I can tell you for the cathedral, we've revised the bylaws probably 3 times in the last 10 years as things come up and we decide how our governance structure should be. You should be familiar with those. And if they aren't working for you or they have something contrary to the way you actually practice, they should be revised so that they reflect what you really do and how you do it. For people who have experience with other dioceses, and different dioceses handle this differently, but in the Diocese of Louisiana, whoever the rector is the president and the presiding officer of the vestry. The wardens certainly have their scope of authority, but it is the rector who leads the vestry. And that's important from a governance standpoint. So it's something you should be aware of. So operational duties. First and foremost, you are charged with overseeing the finances of the parish. And I can tell you, I'm not even though I'm the treasurer of the diocese, I'm not a finance person, right? I'm a lawyer.
No.
And it's probably always good to have somebody with a finance background on your vestry. Certainly helpful. One thing I think that we all have to recognize when we are, especially when you're calling a rector, I would guess that 9 times out of 10, you are choosing someone for their pastoral presence, someone who you connect with and you think is going to be a good pastor truly for you and for everybody else in your parish. You don't first and foremost think about looking for a good business person. And we have to recognize that not every good priest is a good business person. They need support and they need that. Not every parish can afford an administrator. So there's a lot of volunteer effort that has to go into making sure the finances of the parish are handled properly. That's a primary responsibility of the vestry. The other is overseeing and preserving the physical assets, the building, the church, if there's a school, whatever those physical assets are, the vestry is charged with making sure that they're preserved and taken care of. As we already talked about, the hiring of the rector is an important task for the vestry when that occurs. Of course, it's a very interesting proposition in the church. We hire the rector, but we can't fire the rector because once the rector is called, only the bishop can facilitate a departure. But we can talk about that later if anybody has a question about it. And as I said before, letters of agreement are very important, and also important that while the vestry has charge of the budget for the parish, so you can make the determination about how many staff members there are going to be or what they're going to be budgeted to be paid. The actual employment of the parish staff lies with the rector, not with the vestry. The next aspect of our role truly is leadership. And I guess I'm fortunate I have not had the experience personally, but in some parishes, there are different camps and people who have different interests or factions or what have you. Your obligation as an elected leader is to represent the entire parish and be conscious of the fact that there are different interests within a parish community, but to be open to listening to all of those views and try to do your best to make sure we are representing everyone who worships with us. Wardens do traditionally have specific areas of responsibility. Junior wardens by history are the property managers for the parish. That's not required in the canons of either the church or the diocese. So I guess I would always suggest that you look at the skill set of the people who are on your vestry so that you task those things. I can tell you, Amanda George is on here from the cathedral. When her husband was the senior warden and I was the junior warden, I did not take care of property. I would have no idea what I was doing. And her husband did that job, although I think he curses me for it. But you have to use the skill sets of the people who you have. But your organizational document should be clear about areas of responsibility and who will be responsible for each.
Mario.
The other is being prepared and doing the work of the vestry. Not that it's supposed to be a full-time job, and goodness, I hope for your parish's sake it's not. But you should be prepared. People need to know what the issues are. They need to read the materials that come to them before meetings. You always got to be prepared to do the work. Conflicts. So this is an area of consistent struggle, I think, within our parishes, and some of the issues that I have seen through the years that filters up to the diocese, and it's often related to property matters. So you need a new roof, and there's a parishioner who's a roofer. So you use them because they're going to give you a good deal and get the work done, and everybody trusts them, and it's going to be wonderful. And then you put on the roof and it leaks. Is it a conflict of interest to contract with a parishioner? It's not if everybody understands the issues and that this is a arm's length transaction between the parish and the parishioner. But it becomes a conflict when it doesn't go the way everybody hopes, when there's a problem with the work or a problem with payment or any number of issues that can come up in a commercial transaction. My personal view, it is so much better to get a third party totally unrelated to the church, because then it is truly a commercial transaction. It may cost you a few dollars more, but at the same time, you've got the separation. If you have to make a claim against somebody, you don't feel bad about doing it. If you have to sue somebody, you don't feel bad about doing it because it's not somebody who's part of your parish family. Always be mindful of that. I think vestries need to be particularly attuned to that because it is a source. I've seen it again and again of, gee, we wish we hadn't done X, or we hadn't worked with whoever it is because now it's so difficult, and how can you complain because they gave us a good deal, and all those personal issues that really we shouldn't put ourselves in that position for. So if you can avoid that, my recommendation is to not get into those situations. The second, conflicts within the parish. And I always like to use incense because we use incense fairly frequently at the cathedral, and there are some people who are decidedly anti-incense people and don't understand why we do that, or the people who want right one versus right two and feel very strongly about it. Part of our job as an elected leader is to not just dump everything on the rector. And in part, yes, they've got the decision-making over worship and liturgy, but part of our job as vestry people is to ensure that we are supporting our rector in the decisions that they make. So when those conflicts arise, it's really not fair for you as a member of the vestry to just point the finger at the rector and say, well, it's all him or her, right? I didn't have anything to do with it. I agree with you, whatever. Part of the vestry's job, at least in my mind, is that once a decision is made, the vestry and the rector should speak with one voice, and you shouldn't undercut anybody else on the vestry or the worship leaders in any of those conflicts. The last conflict between the rector and the vestry, and sometimes this is difficult because certainly this is where the bishop comes in. There are, for any organization, the people who, I'll use the cathedral. The dean has been at the cathedral for over 20 years. The people who called him and elected him are long gone. Most of them are deceased. He's still there, but someday a vestry could turn around and say, who hired this guy? We don't like him anymore. and just not or want to have a change. Those conflicts, before that escalates to the bishop, I think there has to be a lot of conversation, both within the vestry and the parish, about where that parish is headed. It's a very uncomfortable issue, but if those issues do arise, certainly Morgan McIntyre, who's the transition officer and the canon to the ordinary, needs to know about it, and the bishop needs to know about it, because those are conflicts that you probably can't always resolve by yourself. The thing that I would suggest to you is that the canon should know if there's some problem that's becoming intractable, that's very serious. Certainly, we want the relationship of a rector and their parish to be an overall positive one, because that's the only way this works. But you can't take that on individually as a vestry. Okay. We have a lot of responsibilities in our roles. Stewardship is an important one. And we're all Episcopalians, so we don't like to ask people for money. That's part of our ethos, right? But stewardship is critical for the support of the church. And it is not simply the responsibility of our rectors. We, by agreeing to serve on the vestry, we're agreeing to participate in the process of stewardship. And hopefully anybody who wished to serve or agreed to serve on a vestry already understands the necessity of stewardship. But if you don't, frankly, you have to learn it. It is a critical part of ensuring that the finances, which is our primary responsibility, are taken care of. And we cannot take care of the physical assets of our parish if there aren't sufficient funds to do it. So stewardship is critical for us to practice, believe in, and not everybody is good at doing that, and I realize it. Allison told you at the beginning, I was a school board chair for 3 years, so I had to get used to asking people for money, because that was virtually all I did. But it is a critical part of elected service. Pledges and endowments, and I realize not every parish is one that pledges regularly. A lot of people are plate givers, and there's no generosity is generosity. We certainly not critical against people who don't wish to pledge, but it is a very important part for budgeting to know what we're talking about, right? What assets you're going to have. And you can't plan for very much if you don't have some sense. So pledging is important. That should be part of the stewardship conversation. For parishes that have endowments, I would suggest to you, if your vestry doesn't have a separate investment committee, you should think about that. The diocese has a separate board of trustees whose only role is to look at the investments of the diocese. It's important from the standpoint that requires a little bit of experience, some certainly financial knowledge, getting the right advisors. I think it's an important role that simply shouldn't be left to the vestry by itself, especially since the membership of the vestry changes so regularly. There should be some level of consistency with overlooking the long-term financial condition of your parish. The parochial report, and this is one that if you don't know Canon McIntyre yet, you'll get to know her because she's the person who makes sure, along with Chris Speed, that parochial reports are turned in. There are a lot of people who think that parochial reports are outdated. I know they ask a lot of information that you don't maybe think is terribly important, but the parochial reports are critical for the operation of the diocese. And they're due on March 1st every year. It's not just the rector's responsibility, it's the vestries as well. Both the senior warden and the treasurer of your parish have to sign off on it before it is submitted. That is the method by which the diocesan assessments are calculated to support the work of the diocese. The diocese also is obligated to turn that information over to the national church, because the assessment of our diocese to help operate the national church is based on those reports as well. So if you don't know what the parochial report is and you're serving on a vestry, please talk to your rector so you know. But it should be a collaborative effort, especially in a parish where you don't have a paid administrator, because they do take a lot of work to prepare and complete. But that is a very important part of the diocese operations. And frankly, we operate with a very small staff who have a lot to do and shouldn't have to chase grown-ups to get parochial reports, but they do that every year. Convention. I would suspect you all know what convention is. Happens every year, our diocesan-wide annual meeting. It is first, if your parish complies and completes its parochial reports, you're entitled to have a number of votes at convention. I hope that convention is viewed as an opportunity for us to all gather across the diocese and not a burden. But participation in convention, I think, is important for members of vestries so that you hear firsthand what's happening across the diocese. Hopefully, your voice will help the diocese run better, and hopefully what you hear at convention will be helpful when you take it back to your parishes to help you operate better. So I think that's important. Diocesan assessments, please don't call them taxes. It is, nobody, very few people contribute to the diocese on a regular basis like we pledge to our churches. The only way the diocese works, despite having an endowment, is the contributions from the parishes through the diocesan assessment. And I know there's a lot of, some people like the way the canons work and how the assessment works, and some people don't. That is a function of convention to decide how that operates, certainly. But the system that we currently have under the canons, the assessments are critical for the diocese to work. And those are paid periodically through the year on a regular basis. And if you don't know what the status of your payments are with the diocesan assessment, you should know as an elected leader. One thing that our diocese does, which is not universal, is we have an assessment review committee. So if your individual parish has some difficulty in a particular year, and we see this repeatedly, the effects of Hurricane Ida, for example, on many of our churches, didn't allow them to make a full payment of their assessment for a particular year, for that particular year. The assessment review committee works with the parish to accommodate whatever emergencies happen within your churches. So that is something I just always assumed everybody did that, and that's rather unique, frankly, to our diocese. So finances. And there's going to be another session. As Allison said, this is the first of 3. There is going to be one particularly focused on problems of fraud within the church. As disheartening as that is to think about, over the course of the last probably 10 years, we've had at least 4 significant thefts from churches, from either from a staff person or from a vestry person. It is important for elected leaders to understand the finances of the diocese, of the parish, and how, just as a practical matter, how these things work. What happens to the plates at the end of the service, and who's responsible for making sure that the money gets someplace safe, and who counts it. How many people sign checks in your parish? Who approves expenditures, and is it just one person or is it two? Who gets the bank statement? Who reads it? Do we have insurance? Do we have the right amount of insurance? All those things are important for you to not be involved in day to day, but certainly to understand, so that you can help your parish operate more smoothly, properly, and make sure that nobody is taking from the church something that they shouldn't. As I said before, the physical assets, managing the physical assets is an important role of elected leaders. First, just managing the building and grounds. The other is deferred maintenance. I can pretty much assure you that every church building in our diocese has some level of deferred maintenance. And it's because it's really easy to put it off, and it's difficult. The roof isn't leaking today, so let's put it off until it does. I can tell you that deferred maintenance only compounds itself, and it makes it horrifically worse when you finally do address it. Hurricane Ida brought a number of deferred maintenance issues to light in our churches. Lots of roofs, lots of significant water damage that probably would not have happened if maintenance had been kept up through time. Only became more expensive, and frankly, especially with hurricanes, the deductibles that we all face in all of our churches are significant. They can be terrible and make your operating budget just, very difficult to manage. So if you don't have a plan for addressing deferred maintenance, it is something I strongly recommend that your vestry have a conversation about. Nobody's going to be able to wipe it out in a year. You probably can't wipe it out in 5 years, but there should be a plan for addressing it, so that just from good management of the assets and your finances, hopefully you can get through them, get ahead of those problems before they become catastrophic problems. Next, the care and feeding of your rector. So I made a practice when I was senior warden. I had breakfast with the dean of the cathedral regularly. Not always to talk about what was going on in the parish, but just to be supportive to him. You think that it can never be a lonely job because they're always surrounded by people, but everybody in any role of leadership needs a sounding board. They need somebody to support them. And I think our role as vestry people is to ensure that our rector is getting the care and feeding they need, that they feel supported, that they have a sounding board. And if it doesn't come from the vestry, I don't know who would come. The other is really assessing. You think you know who you're hiring when you hire them, but you don't, because you don't, it's just like any hire. If you're a business person, you think you see the strengths of somebody who you're taking on, but we all see how many people rotate through jobs. The strengths you thought you saw may not be what it really is, and you have to learn those and understand them. If you have a rector who's really good at finances, then maybe you don't need a parish administrator, or you don't need the equivalent of a CFO. But if they have no business sense, you need to make sure that there is somebody on the vestry or staff who does have those talents, so that the business gets taken care of. I think knowing or learning where your rector does their best work is part of our job as vestry people. And last but not least, Had a very good friend who served on the vestry long before me at the cathedral. And when I got asked to be nominated, said, "Oh God, you'll be bored to tears. You'll warm a chair for 4 years." And I thought, God, what a waste of time. I hope that if you agreed to serve on a vestry, you're not just warming a chair. Somebody thought that you had talent that would bring to your parish and help move your parish and our diocese and our church and our mission forward. And if you are not helping to define and craft and implement the vision for our church, imagine nobody is. We're very fortunate that we have dynamic clergy. We have a lot of new clergy in this diocese who are just wonderful people. I've been so fortunate to get to know so many of them, but they need your help to define what the future of your parish is going to be and bring that vision to life. So if I can leave you with nothing else, it is make use of the privilege you've been given to serve your parish. Allison, that's the end of my prepared discussion.
Thank you so much. That was terrific. We so appreciate you sharing all of that great information with us and really covering a lot of ground and going over a wide variety of the kinds of typical scenarios that we all contend with on our time on the vestry. And I wonder, at this time, I'm going to go ahead and stop our recording, and I'm happy to open it up to questions.